Today we're going to discuss making custom RC bodies. What's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to walk you through the process that I took to create this hood that you see mounted onto this custom chassis here. This chassis was made by UCFab and it's made to mimic a full-size vehicle called the Karnivor. That was featured on a BFG poster way back in the day. Some of you would probably remember it if you saw it, but this car was pretty special to me back then. It was one of the first rock crawlers I really admired, and Kyle from UCFab created this car. Now, this was Kyle's original car, but he made one other version of this, and I own that one. Now, my version has been with Kyle for a little while, but this version went from Kyle to Taiwan and spent some time with an owner there, and then it was sold again, but back to the United States on the East Coast. Recently, that owner sent it back to just kind of be refreshed near me. And since I had access to it and I never had an appropriate hood for my car, while all those stars aligned, I decided that it'd be a great time to tackle this project. Recently, I picked up a vacuum forming machine so that it made making parts like this much easier. But you can also make vacuum forming machines at home with pretty simple items if you wanted to create the same thing and didn't want to put the investment in to buy a machine. But the cost of desktop vacuum forming machines has come down a long ways. The one that I recently picked up can be had for about $1,000, which isn't cheap, but it's a powerful tool and opens up a lot of capabilities. Either way, they're very simple and very easy. The trick of it all is making the tooling that you need to create these parts. The original Karnivor used a hood that was styled after a Hummer, and Proline made this body called the Desert Militia body, and that's what Kyle used initially when he created this project. And he took and he cut it and he sectioned it in a way that made it look pretty convincing. However, those bodies have been long discontinued and almost impossible to find. So, like I said, I never had a proper one for mine, and you couldn't find them. It became very difficult. Now was the time to dive into this project to create this new hood that you see here on this Karnivor. So I want to run you through the process of what we did to get this done. A friend of mine, Gene, who is associated with UCFab and is the one refurbishing this car, came over today, brought the car, the original hood, and I got the supplies, and he lended me a hand with this entire process, and he was a big help with that. The first step in this process was to take the body and back it with as much clay as we needed to get it put down onto a base. This was so that when we vacuum formed down on top of it, we didn't have anything that was holding our buck into that piece of thermoformed plastic. Before calling it done, we did take and add additional clay into seams or holes in the body where there was previously gaps. We also wanted to do this so that when we fill over top of this, it doesn't have its own backfilling or undercuts so that it was hard to get the Lexan body and clay out of the next cast. One thing you may notice is that the center section of the hood has a bit of a cross area, and that's because that area is going to be depressed lower since it gets cut out. So I just cut a channel in there to make sure that it had plenty of airflow to get any of the air that was trapped in that area out. Once the clay base had been considered complete, we transferred this whole part onto a piece of styrene. After securing the bottom to the styrene, we then used more styrene to build walls around the mold, using more hot glue to seal the joints around this entire piece. And from there, we then needed to mix our plaster. For this portion, we used plaster of Paris. Used a decent amount of this, mixed nice and thin so that it ran into the mold and got into all of the cavities. This will do a really good job of capturing details, all the way down to lips of edges of stickers and things like that. So clean your initial part up as best you can before going to this, because a lot of that detail will come through. Before pouring the plaster in, you can apply a release agent to your base if you like. We poured the plaster in, making sure that we had an inch or so over the top of the highest point of the base mold, just to make sure that there was enough strength to this so that we could easily pull it out and still have an intact mold. After around a half hour of drying time, we were able to pull that cast out of that initial mold. At this point, we needed to pull the clay and Lexan body out of the bottom side of this casting, getting as much out as we can, and then we got to do a little bit of cleanup. There should be. Using a small amount of water as to not degrade the plaster mold, just got it as clean as we could without going overboard and spending way too much time on that part. From there, we moved right to the next stage of casting, and that was to mix up 1 gallon of Bondo. You need to make sure to mix this as thoroughly as possible to give this the best chance of having a nice even cure to it. At that point, we then backfilled our negative plaster mold. It's a good thing we went and got 1 gallon. After that, it was time to break the Bondo out of the plaster mold. This mold worked really well, but there were still some areas that didn't have great Bondo fill to it. There were some areas that had some air bubbles, as well as areas that just didn't fill super well. After doing an initial sanding, we did add some additional Bondo in areas to fill small pinholes, and then doing more sanding. At this point, this mold has only been sanded with 80 grit sandpaper. Before this is called finished or finalized, I'll definitely step up to like maybe 400 grit as a final, just to make sure that it's got a nice smooth surface. Even though the buck isn't what I would consider finalized, it's something that we wanted to pull some pieces off of just to see where we were at. The first pull that we made was with some PETG, which is a clear Lexan-like plastic, but the material that I was using was 0.75 millimeter thick, which is very thin, but it pulls a lot of the details through, so it'll give you an idea of what it looks like. The pull went really well. From there, it went to just trimming out from the sheet that it created, made it fit it onto the chassis, and was a success.
That's so good. That's just rough.
I have some 0.060 styrene here, so decided that I wanted to use that to try pulling a mold off of this buck. Ended up with a hood that is, even in this stage, very usable. With material that thick, some of the detail is lost, but at the same time, it kind of acts as a smoothing agent. Turned out to be a pretty nice piece. Now at this point, we've got the hood here and the buck here next to me. Like I said, there's still some work to be done that I'm still going to do, even though I really like this thickness to the hood. I think what I'm going to do is define some of the lines much sharper than I would have typically, just because I know they're going to be somewhat lost when I go with this styrene. It's going to be durable, and for the abuse that I put my chassis through, I think that the upgraded strength of the hood is absolutely worth it. Now for this project, I did use a vacuum former, which cost a $1,000. But like I said, there's also lots of how-tos on building your own simple vacuum formers if you wanted to go a less expensive way. Because beyond that, this didn't take hardly any tools, very basic hand tools, and that was it. This isn't really all that high tech. It's just very labor intensive, and you have to get your inner arts and crafts side going. What it outputs is something that is far beyond the norm of putting a custom build together. This is a truly custom part on a custom chassis, pulling off a look that not just everybody can do. I really like this. I'm really proud of being able to do something like this, and it makes me want to do more. And that's what I like the most about building RC cars like this. You will see on this hood currently that I've got some, blue painter's tape cut, and I've got, some little bit of a grill detail on there and that vent area that these, Hummers had. But I'm gonna use these and then peel those off so that I can create a file and then can create proper, either printed decals for it to have the look, or a stencil package, whatever it's going to take to make this look just even better. Simple stuff though to make this project look even cooler as things go. I know that this type of project is not for everyone, but it's not outside of the reach of most people. I think that you can do something like this if you just decide that you want to put in the effort to create something like it. It's worth it. This was a pre-existing body that just got cut and modified to fit something like this. I've got projects back here behind me that could benefit from the same thing done again, and this makes me want to do it. Maybe even if this isn't for you right now, maybe it'll push you to think about trying it in the future. I highly recommend it. It's very rewarding to dive in and do something like this. This is the first time that I've tried to do something like this at this scale. I've used a number of these techniques for things in the past, but this one was a hit. Super excited. Hopefully some of you enjoyed this as well. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already, hit the notification bell so you see the videos like this as soon as they get uploaded. But as always, thanks again for watching the videos, and we'll see you on the next one.